Alright, we have here another day of first talk. This is your last chance to do so. Thank you for sticking around. So as I told you, this is our second anniversary of Space Shows. We've been doing this now for 4 years, basically. And our next speaker is a very huge speaker in recognition of that. Professor Chris Impey has been here for a little bit more than 2 years. He's been here for 30 years in Arizona. If you're an observational cosmologist, you've read one of his papers. He was one of the earliest users of the Hubble Space Telescope and did much of the early work on gravitational lensing, the Spartan Cosmos Survey. He studied near and dark objects. This is just what I remember from stuff I had to remember in grad school. But he's also won 7 teaching awards in Arizona. He's one of the best instructors there is. And he's been taking the instruction that he's been giving in classrooms and making them available to the widespread public in the form of really, really powerful books. Very, very popular books that you can get at the University of Arizona bookstore. And he is kindly consenting to give our next talk for this month, which will be Our Future in Space. There is no broader subject one could possibly think of for space. So, without further ado, Professor Chris.
Okay, thanks very much. This is a great crowd. Your first speaker was the youthful talent, the future of the field. I'm about a year or two from being pushed out on that ice floe. The saving grace being in Tucson, you don't get ice floes. That'll probably buy me a few more years. So this is a good kind of talk because I get to have a beer. Tomorrow, I'm on stage at Centennial Hall, being the MC for the College of Science graduation. Anyone graduating tomorrow? Man, must be a few. We got 1,000 graduating. Somebody in here is going to be graduating. Okay, so that's McHale, 7,000 people. I'm not going to be drinking beer. I will have a hit glass of whiskey because I'm Scott. That's what we do. You know, but this is a nicer crowd, a nicer situation. I want to talk about the future of space travel, and I came to this subject from a feeling that you might have experienced just from looking at the news and reading the papers. That on the one hand, it seems like we're not going anywhere fast. Most people on Earth were not alive when the last astronaut set foot on the moon. It's a distant cultural memory. It costs a lot of money. And it sort of seems like, why would we go back? Why do we even care about that? We've got problems on Earth. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, you probably also noticed there's a burgeoning private sector entrepreneurial activity in space. And so what's going on? You know, what is the future in space? Is it sort of something we shouldn't bother with because we've got bigger problems on Earth and it's expensive and it's difficult and humans can't live there? Or is it something that's really exciting and all this youthful money and talent is moving into that arena and maybe that is the future? So that led me to write a book. Any time things seem interesting in that way, I think there's books there. And I was led to think about this in a little deeper way by this amazing picture that has emerged from genetic research in the last decade. This is the way humans spread across Earth 50,000 years ago after leaving Africa. And the point is that it was very fast. First of all, just imagine, these are hunter-gatherers. They're really genetically and anatomically no different from us. They're modern humans, working in small groups, you know, subsisting off whatever they could find, and yet they move across the planet with extraordinary speed. In particular, they move down through the Americas from the Bering Strait, which is a land bridge back then, down through Patagonia in a few thousand years. That's a couple hundred generations. That's extraordinary. And they did it because they wanted to. They didn't have to. We are the only species that travels huge distances, this migration across the planet, because we want to, because of curiosity, because we want to see what's there, rather than just to follow the berries and the twigs and the herbs and whatever we might eat. And of course, I look at this picture and think, you know, they were like a third of the way through this journey through the Americas, and they got to Santa Monica. Why didn't they just say, this is pretty nice, let's just stay here? No, we'll go to Patagonia. And so clearly something is going on beyond just finding a nice place to live. Okay, the genetic research is even more interesting because this is about as graphical and nerd-like as I'm going to get on you. This is a correlation between the proportion of a particular variant of the DRD2 gene. So it's a gene that all humans have, and there's an allele, one variation of this gene, which only about 10% of the average human population has. This variation correlates in this graph with the amount of distance early human tribes migrated across the planet. So it's been dubbed the explorer gene. In modern human populations, it's also correlated with risk-taking behavior, with parachuting and skydiving, with ADHD, with various things that happen in humans. And so we can imagine that humans have this gene. If it were this variant of a gene, if it were too dominant, then that little hunter-gatherer tribe, they all just wander into a cave or off a cliff and die, and they couldn't get anywhere. But if there wasn't enough of that, they would just sort of sit where they were and they'd be wiped out by the next plague or the next predator. So this is an interesting thing that we have built into our DNA that lets us explore, that makes us, that compels us to explore. And exploring off the planet is just an extension of this. You get, just to remember what we're talking about with space. I'm going to be talking about space. Low Earth orbit is like a half-day's drive straight up. It's not that far compared to the distance that people travel on the planet. So we have the various pioneers of the space program. I'm highlighting a few that are less well known. This Wan Hu was a Chinese, a minor functionary in the Chinese dynasty, and on the command 47 servants moved forward and lit 47 fireworks, and by the mid, Wan Hu became the world's first astronaut. In practice, of course, he died a horrible, ugly death. But that was a myth. But he wanted to know what was up there. We have Robert Goddard, and it's very hard to extrapolate from Robert Goddard. His rocket is actually a little thing at the top, a tiny little liquid oxygen rocket. It's really no more sophisticated than the rockets we use now. And in 1926, on a frigid midwinter day, it traveled 183 feet across his Aunt Effie's cabbage patch. And it's pretty hard to go from that in 50 years to the Saturn V, but that's what happened. So these visionaries were kind of remarkable people. And they weren't always people. This Baker was a spider monkey, the first primate in space. And Miss Baker was buried at Goddard Space Flight Center with full military honors in the early 1970s, and 4,000 people went to Miss Baker's funeral. And you should be so lucky if 4,000 people go to your funeral. Yeah. Yuri Gagarin, as we probably know, we'll sort of skate over this because we're not getting on well with the Russians, but basically the Russians kicked our ass in every major category. First person into space, Yuri Gagarin, first woman, first spacewalk, first object on the moon, make a list. They just did everything first. And so it kicked this huge geopolitical pissing contest, the space race, into gear. And so we recognize that the space program started in a very strange geopolitical context. And maybe it's not the most ideal or altruistic or visionary way we might imagine going into space, but that's how it happened. And that's how we got to where we are. So we just have to accept that as the history. And then we have the problem, and in nice connection to the previous talk, that I've read the Gallup polls, 8% of Americans, and I'm assuming it's not 8% of you, that would be 7 or 8 of you, think it was a conspiracy theory, we didn't actually go, the government made it up, it's like, And so I'm sort of bipolar on it. The educator in me is just pissed off as all get out about that. The fact that 8% of Americans would willfully deny what is the greatest technological achievement humans have ever done, whether we remember it or not. On the other hand, if I were going to make a list of the batshit crazy thing that 8% of Americans believe, it's just in there with Elvis is still alive and JFK conspiracy theory, make a list. It's in there. Why get all bent out of shape about being a hoax? Okay, so at the moment I'm okay, I'm chilling. But remember that some people don't think we actually did this. But if you are going to question this, don't do it to the freaking astronauts.
You're the one who said you walked in the middle when you didn't. Call it camouflage because they're fun. And a misrepresented away from me, they're a coward and a liar and a thief.
So, I'm not gonna condone violence. Don't fuck with an astronaut. Get out of the room, right? Bart Sibrel is a Dutch filmmaker, 6'7", Buzz is 5'8". You know, just don't question someone's life experience at that level. So those 8% of the people, you know, who believe that stuff in their own living rooms, that's fine. Whatever, do that. Just don't take it to an astronaut. So we've been to space. This is not a normal place. This is not an easy place for us to be. This is an unnatural place. We do it, it's a stretch goal for humanity. It's clearly something that's difficult, and we do have to have a reason to do it, because it is expensive, it is hard, humans are not to be there, not made to be there. So I have to segue now to my first trivia question. First trivia question, are you ready for this? How many people have experienced zero gravity in Earth orbit? Your answers are 50, 100, 200, 500, or 1,000.
500.
I heard 500 somewhere there. Yes. That's very good. That's close.
Stick up your hand if you have 500.
So that's very good. It's close to 500. It's a small number. 10 times that number of people have stood on Mount Everest. That's not such a special club. I don't even bother to join that. If you want to join a club, join the Zero Gravity Club. As a sidebar, I'll mention that, and this was kept quiet during the Apollo and other missions, because NASA had this right stuff thing going on where the astronauts were heroes. So 1 in 5 of the people that go into Earth orbit or experience zero gravity for more than a few minutes, a few hours, it gets debilitatingly, violently ill. I mean, you're talking about car sickness? No. This is like you cannot function. So literally 1 in 10 of the astronauts who went up there had this happen to them. So that's 50 of those 500 or so people. And that's something that they just don't talk about a lot, because NASA doesn't like to talk about that. But as space tourism approaches, you know, recognize that when your nephew, who made good and became a bond trader and just bought you that ticket on the Branson, you know, Vomit Comet, it is going to be a Vomit Comet. It's going to be a little uncomfortable. Don't get all misty-eyed about this stuff. Zero gravity is not really what we were built for. Just saying that. Even though I would go and I'd just see what happens. So what's the state of space? The state of space is a little tricky. Like I mentioned, it's a young thing. If we're going to put it in perspective, we've had human civilization 10,000 years. Industrial revolution, 400 years. Space travel, 50 or 60 years. It's not been going that long. It's hard to judge it. And as I mentioned, for most of that history, it's been driven by the geopolitical rivalry between the former superpower, the Soviet Union, not so much a superpower anymore, in the United States. Now the field is broadened out, so it's a different kind of activity. So it's a little hard to judge it. Also, you may notice that the space shuttle has been retired. Nobody really likes the space station, so some of the big, expensive programs in space aren't that popular, even among space scientists and astronomers, let alone the general public. So this is what contributes to the sense that kind of we're spinning our wheels for an eye. Also, we have to be a little careful. I mean, I can ding NASA, I get NASA funding, and I can be critical of NASA, but let's just be honest about what NASA had to deal with. This was the extraordinary historical spike in NASA funding during Apollo. NASA's budget was in free fall before the last moon landing. The last 3 moon landings were canceled, and it was an unsustainable 5% of GDP. But notice, more dispiritingly, for people who would like the speed of the space dream, NASA's budget has declined, and this is now in real terms, 2016 dollars, by a factor of 2 since 1991. So NASA is trying to do hard, expensive things with half the money it had 25 years ago. That's just the deal. It's not a priority. And we know what the problem is. NASA really only gets into the news for 2 reasons. Because something blew up, or because they want more money. And of course those things are connected. Because when something blows up, you need money to replace it or do something different. So NASA has problems. And they're really that, in a nutshell, is why we can't rely on NASA or any government space agency to do these wonderful, dreamlike, visionary things. It's going to come from somewhere else. But I will point out that objects in the rearview mirror, I think with Jurassic Park where this happened, are closer than they appear. China is developing a gangbuster space program from nothing. And basically the tick marks, you don't have to see the details, but the tick marks are the number of human space launches. So China is growing their space program until a little downturn recently by the rate of their economy, 8 to 10% a year. That's a doubling of the space budget every 5 years. And now you can compare to NASA's problem. So although they started small, NASA has plans for their own space station, for their own moon base, for their own Mars base, and we would be foolish to question whether they can do it or not. The disconcerting part about Chinese ambition is that there's no transparency. So let me give props to Dwight D. Eisenhower, because when he was president and NASA got its charter in 1959, Eisenhower, a general, the real general from the Second World War, he argued strongly that NASA should be a civilian space agency with transparent budgets and missions open to inspection. And he won that argument against his own military. China has a space program that's hand in glove with their military, and we don't really know what they're doing. And we wouldn't know if they we'd probably figure out if they put nukes in space, but there's a concern. So the Chinese growth the space program is exciting for them, it's interesting for us, and it's a real competition. So you can see this is the reboot of the geopolitical pissing contest that we had in the 70s with the Soviets. So that's just happening on the side, just in case you weren't paying attention. But the thing that's exciting, the thing I want to call attention to, which you now see in the news, is the private sector. So we have these new players in the space program that didn't exist a few decades ago. The first space tourists, and there are only 7 of them. There are 7 people who spent over order $10 to $15 million to go on a Soyuz spacecraft for a week on the space station. That's not like a Richard Branson 7 minute zero gravity suborbital thing. That's the real deal. That's a lot of money. The last of these was Antoine Lavery, founder of Cirque Soleil, and now the Russians aren't doing that anymore for a while. So those 7 space tourists were like it. And they were all billionaires, like they're not us, like who cares? That's nothing to do with anyone else. But that's the beginning of something that is about to change very soon. And so you've seen the inception of this in the X Prize. The X Prize was a brilliant idea, an idea of Peter De Landis, someone not well known to most people, the architect of the X Prize Foundation. It was modeled on the Lindbergh Prize. Lindbergh won essentially $10,000 for that first incredible transatlantic flight, which was called the Flying Fool. It was a dark horse, no one thought he could win it. All the groups that competed for that prize spent way more than the prize to do that, and that's the point. You spur competitive activity. So the X Prize, won by Burt Rutan, with a brilliant design of a spacecraft that went just into near space, 100 kilometers, and then did it again a week later. That was a brilliant competition that spurred a new activity. It's a great model. And of course, if we use the historical analogy, within 10 years of Lindbergh's flight, commercial space aviation took off in this country. It didn't exist before that. And so we can use the analogy and imagine that commercial space flight is going to take off soon. And I believe that's the case. And who are the people? Well, they're people you know. They're people that are in the news, like Richard Branson, who's from my country, self-promoter in the UK, and a self-promoter in the US, Elon Musk, who's made his money with PayPal. And it is truly a brilliant man. He's the triple threat. He is a very clever businessman, he's extremely wealthy, and he's trained as an engineer, engineering physics. So he knows how to design spacecraft. He can do it. He can do the math himself. That's a pretty dangerous combination. And then there are people like Burt Rutan, the designer of who Branson was smart enough to get as his designer for Virgin Galactic. And then people we don't know as much, like Dave Landis, who was the architect of the X-Prize. And then there are new players. There's Jeff Bezos, obviously hugely deep pockets, the founder of Amazon. His company is very secretive. We don't know too much. They came out under wraps about a year ago, Blue Origins. They've also done reusable spacecraft in a very, very direct competition with Elon Musk. So that's that same competitive juices between 2 billionaires. And then even more recently, Yuri Milner. We can see the commonality here. You have to have a little bit. This is some neural pattern baldness and some Eastern Euro thing going on here. So that's what you have to be a spacecraft. We'll get back to Yuri Milner. So I don't want to make you feel sad or poor or look at your bank accounts, but there's a lot of very ridiculously wealthy people in the world. And so if billionaires wanted to do this, they could knock into a top half NASA's budget in a second, because the cumulative wealth of the world's billionaires is $7 trillion. Just let that sink in for a minute, and you really will feel poor. So any one of these billionaires not only can compete in the space arena, but a handful of them could spend more than NASA's yearly budget on this activity. That just puts it in perspective. And that's why this is going to happen, because so many of these people, like Musk, are young. They're young enough to be committed to the long term. Musk has said he wants to die on Mars. Who's going to doubt him? He plans to go to the moon, he plans to go to Mars, reusable space. Zero gravity is just the first step. So my second question is, which product was not marketed by Richard Branson at Virgin early in his career?
Watches.
Records, vodka, condoms, or watches?
Watches.
No? Who said watches? She wins. I'm not going to tell stories from my youth, but Richard Branson condoms were not his winning bet. He did have vodka, he did have condoms.
Were they called virgin condoms?
Indeed, virgin, exactly. They were virgin condoms. He was branding whatever he could. But he has a design. As we know, this is tricky stuff, because this prototype for Spaceship Two had a disaster just 18 months ago with the death of a co-pilot and the near death of a pilot. And people are going to die. It's dangerous. They got really raked over the coals, Virgin Galactic, for their procedures, for their safety procedures. So, this is the Wild West phase, and we have to imagine that it's not going to be entirely safe. There's a spaceport in New Mexico where Virgin Galactic and about 7 other private space companies are preparing to go into low Earth orbit for financial. They have a business model, okay? And it's hard. Elon Musk is not shy about how hard it is. He put on the web the day after. That was his first attempt at a reusable rocket. This is his fourth attempt a couple of weeks ago. And I will tell you, this is as hard as it looks. So it's hard. The people doing it are persistent. They're in it for the long haul, and we should just be honest about the fact that people are going to die. This, even if you can't see the details, this is the history of the death rate for flight of commercial aviation in the first 50 years of civil aviation. The death rate from after the Lindbergh prize to the 1990s is dropped by a factor of 100. And you don't think about flying. So if commercial space travel is dangerous, it'll get safer. And people will do it, and they won't worry about it so much. Of course, the things people really worry about, the things people wonder about and worry about are twofold. It's basically, okay, I'll be simple, sex and body. I can't answer both questions fully, but research on my book, I had to find out through my diligent have people have sex in space. So I phoned various NASA astronauts that I knew indirectly, NASA administrators, various people. I asked the question, still with the ability to go on the record, not a surprise. But basically the sum of my research was that about 95% certainty in some dark corner of the space station, which is a pretty big labyrinthine structure, people have had it off. That's the okay? So you can just pretty much tuck that away. Yes, people have had sex in space. The other thing we worry about is a little more mundane. It's a sort of plumbing part. Because most of what the astronauts do in space, let's be honest, is electrical work and plumbing.
I'd like to begin tonight with a special Colbert Report shout-out. Hey! This one goes out to astronaut and friend of the show, Garrett Reisman, who is watching the report from orbit right now in a desperate attempt to forget that his space station's only toilet is broken. Terrible news, unless you write news headlines for a living. In which case, Houston, your job is easy. According to NASA, the astronauts are now using a backup bag-like collection system. To be clear, this is not a bag. That's what we use here on Earth. In space, they use the advanced technology of a bag-like collection system. Is everyone clear on that?
Steven,
Yes?
is it a bag? Because it sounds like these astronauts are pooping in a bag.
No! These men are not pooping in a bag, they are heroes. They are pooping in a collection system that is bag-like. It's science, move it on. Anyway, Garrett, just hold out as long as you can. And, hey, wait a second, what's my rain stick doing here? Garrett, the whole nation clenches with you. Together we are a roaring waterfall of solidarity, a mighty river of flowing support. Woo! Besides, if things get really desperate, you can always relieve yourself in the Hubble Space Telescope.
So I hope I'm putting space in perspective. You might get laid, but you're almost certainly going to have to poop. And these are the things you're going to have to weigh up. And you're going to spend a fair amount of money doing this. So you need to balance all this stuff. So I use data from, of course, Wikipedia. I tried to find this on NASA websites. It's impossible. And I plotted the average cost of a space mission over the last 50 years, pretty much the whole space program, against the average cost of a movie. Movies have been getting more expensive, not surprising. Space missions got cheaper for a while and then were getting more expensive on average. And there are outliers, of course, and I just got some examples here. And I'll just highlight one little particular pairing recently, which I like this pairing when people are questioning the cost of science. If you had $440 million burning a hole in your pocket, you could hire a really good film director, James Cameron, to make a really cool movie about life on an exomoon, Avatar. Or you could build a freaking Kepler spacecraft and find hundreds of exoplanets. You could do the actual experiment. They cost the same. Which makes the Kepler spacecraft a gag deal to me. I mean, it's not either or, but let's put it in perspective. These are incredible science results that aren't that expensive. And the analogy is not trivial because I'm analogizing space travel with entertainment. So let me extend the analogy, maybe push it to the breaking point. I think there have been roughly 4 phases of the internet. And we don't even think about the history of the internet. It's amniotic fluid to us. Most of the young people in the room can't imagine life without it, so how would you even think about it before the internet? But there were people like the guy on the lower left, who nobody will know, J.R. Licklider. In 1960, he wrote a position paper for the RAND Corporation envisaging data in the cloud, the wireless internet, essentially what we have in our hands now, at a time when the average computer was the size of this phone. That's amazing. These are the visionaries. It then moved into incubation with the military-industrial complex. The first people that had email worked at essentially military labs or civilian installations working with labs, eventually universities. Average person didn't have email. And 1990, and then moved into research arena. As you know, the web browser was developed first at CERN, not by some .com entrepreneur. And then in 1995 is the Big Bang. That's, if you want to make a mark on a calendar, 1995 was the year the word internet was actually coined, the year a company with a weird name called Amazon was formed, the year 2 graduate students at Stanford got together and imagined what search would be like, and then founded Google 2 years later. And now, the point is, 20 years later, can you really imagine what it was like before? Because it's unrecognizable. And so that's, I think, my point. In space, we have the same 4 phases. We have the visionaries, the people like Goddard, who could barely imagine what you would get to within 50 years. We have incubation by the military-industrial complex. That's a little uncomfortable. We bought Werner von Braun over from Germany. His Middle-earth rocket factory in the northern part of Germany was responsible for killing 8,000 slave workers, and those bombs raining down on my country of the UK killed another 7,000 or 8,000 of my countrymen. He was responsible indirectly for murdering 15 or 16,000 people. We brought him back here. The public didn't know his Nazi past was sanitized, and he became the architect of Saturn V and NASA. It's a little ugly. The history is a little awkward when you look at it like that. So you incubated the military-industrial complex. Eventually, you moved into the civilian sector, and NASA, as I said, was a civilian mandate from Eisenhower all the way through. And so, where am I going to draw the line? Is this year the same as 1995 for the internet? Is this the Big Bang where 20 years from now we'll look back and the commercial sector will so dominate everything else we can't imagine what it was like before? I don't know. Maybe that's a misty-eyed vision, but I'm suggesting it could be possible. And why it's possible is because the work that Elon Musk, SpaceX, Blue Origins are doing is the hard engineering work of lowering the launch cost by a factor of 5 or 10 from the current value. And so the current value it would cost for a person, a 70-kilo person. I'm going to be metric. I'm European, so I'll use metric. So the launch cost for a person is already dropping from millions to a few hundred thousand. And if Musk and Bezos do what they pretty much have shown they can do, we'll be down in the realms of a few tens of thousands of dollars to go into space. That is a whole new ballgame. And that's the basis for the optimism that this is going to spread from those billionaires and those people dropping huge chunks of change for their tour rides in space. The other reason for optimism is this is the history of all space launches. And just look at, without looking at details, just look at the green curve. That's commercial space launches. 2014 was the first year in the history of space activity where there were more commercial space launches than the launches of all governments combined. It's happening. It's already happening. It's happening right now. This is the moment. And so what's on the rise? I'm going to finish with some predictions. It's hard to make predictions. Okay, a little ugly part of this is it's unregulated. I said it's the Wild West. It is the Wild West. There is no regulation in space. Luckily, there was the Space Treaty of 1965, which demilitarizes space, which is why we hope there won't be any nukes in space. But the Treaty of the Moon, which was supposed to show that you couldn't own the Moon or an asteroid or Mars or anything like that, that wasn't signed by the U.S. or any world power. So it's a Wild West. You can own what you want. You can put advertising up there. There are going to be sex motels, zero-gravity sex motels in space. Guaranteed, it's going to happen. There's going to be really ugly advertising, and it's going to be neon and bright, and astronomers will get all bent out of shape about it, deservedly so. This is going to happen. So there's going to be good, bad, and ugly. I mean, the benefit of when it was in the nice little sector of the government and governments and space agencies, well, it's sort of regulated by implicitly. But when it goes in the commercial sector, all bets are off. I think we're going to get a space elevator, stairway to heaven. It's like the Indian road trip. You just suspend a cable up to the point where the centrifugal force for the spinning object the cable's on balances its weight, and it just hangs there. And you can put solar-powered elevators up and down. You don't spend any rocket fuel. That's huge expense that meant that the Saturn V was 97% fuel to launch that 3% payload. That's gone if you had a space elevator. So, we can't do a space elevator on Europe. The materials are not strong enough, but they actually are good enough to do it on the moon, which would be a staging point to the solar system. And we probably can get to an Earth-based space elevator in a decade or so. So that would be really exciting. It's a 10, 20-year project. It's a $10, $20 billion project. $20 billion, that's about a fifth of what the space station has cost so far. So we can spend that kind of money, especially in the commercial sector. And mining asteroids, that's another possibility. The precursor of this is, of course, the cost of precious metals. So if you just take the average 500-meter near-Earth asteroid, we already know from our rendezvous with the comets that we can land on a comet and steer it into an Earth-Moon system capturing orbit and then mine it. And the value just of the metals is about a few $1 trillion. You add in the rare earths, which have enormous strategic value, and that's another few $1 trillion. Obviously, you can bust the market if you bring that down to Earth too easily, and it's expensive to do that. But there are people, those same people who were willing to lose their shirt wildcatting for oil in Texas in the 1920s, 1930s, they can do this. It is simply going to happen. We're going to be mining asteroids soon. It's going to be a huge new commercial activity, 10, 20, 30 years. Beyond the horizon, it's hard to tell. So I'm going to finish with some predictions. You can't hold me to them because I'll be dead when most of them happen, and you'll be dead when some of them happen too, so it doesn't matter. I'm going to use the power of extrapolation. Scientists love to extrapolate, and a log plot is always so seductive. And this will lead us to project from horse and buggy through cars and rockets that maybe in 100 or a few hundred years will actually get to a few percent light speed and leave the solar system. You know, let's be honest, that's what the visionaries want. They want to go to the stars. They don't just want to be pedaling around in our backyard. That is a ways off, but I actually think it will eventually happen. And of course, we see just in the news the people who have this vision. And, you know, it's not a cookie vision. This is breakthrough starship. The people involved, Stephen Hawking, deep pockets of Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, a lot of very prestigious scientists have gone into this. Yuri Milner, that Russian, we showed you a picture of, put $100 million on the table and said, let's start working these ideas out. They've made a list of 20 technical challenges, and their model, their goal, is to basically use exceptionally powerful lasers to launch tiny spacecraft, miniaturized technology. Remember the guts of your smartphone. Okay, this thing is 100 times more powerful than the computer that got Apollo to the moon. Let's put it in perspective. The guts of this thing weigh about 10 grams. A smaller version of that is the basis for a nanobot to travel to the stars. And you power it with a solar sail that's about 1 meter across, and you power that with 100 terawatt lasers beaming energy up from Earth. It's crazy stuff. But the engineering challenges have been listed, itemized, and there are really smart people working on this. It's going to take a while, but I applaud their vision. I applaud the ambition. So what's it going to look like? I mean, can we even do this? They're just starting to play the game out. How you would do this, how you would assemble an array of lasers powerful enough to project energy to accelerate these tiny little solar sail nanobots to 10% of the speed of light. At 10% of the speed of light, they would reach the nearest star in 40 years. That's okay. That's a couple of generations. That's something people could buy into. They would have to send their information back along the line, because you're sending waves of these things by little transmitters. So at light speed, we can get back sensing of the hopeful Earth that we might find around Proxima Centauri. That planet is not known yet. We're still looking for the Earth-like planets in the nearest star system. So all this may come together or it may not, but I think it's an amazing idea. So my last trivia question, at the miniature scale has been very exciting. So, you know, forget about $10 million to be a space tourist. How much does it cost these days to launch your own satellite? Is it $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, $1 million, or $10 million? Who said 10? You said 10,000, yeah. It's not, you know, it's the cost of a good used car or a crappy new car. You can have your own satellite. These are CubeSats or nanosats. They get bundled into a payload, and the unit cost. And you can put whatever sensors you want in them. And of course, the nice thing about this nanosat model is that it's gone away from the NASA model. The NASA model is sort of big, expensive hardware that's really robust and powerful, and is not supposed to break and is highly redundant. The nanosat model is you throw a shitload of these things out there. It's a cell phone technology, and if half of them don't work, no problem. If half of them fall back into the atmosphere and burn up, no problem. Or they're designed to do that anyway, so as not to leave space junk. So it's just a very different model, and it lowers the bar to this activity. Student groups are doing this now. It's really exciting. So if you did this, if you could get out of the solar system at 5% or 10% of the speed of light, and we can imagine, now I'm going to get a little astrobiological on your ass, we can imagine that we're not the first intelligent technological civilization that can do this, because why should we be? There could have been an Earth clone that started 8 billion years before the Earth formed that has an 8 billion year head start on us, so why should we be the most advanced? Well, anyone who's been doing this could actually colonize or travel the galaxy in 10 million years, which is short, blink of the eye. So maybe it's happening. Interesting. There are things that I don't think are going to happen, so I'll, at least, so I'm not accused of just being just a total booster of space stuff. Here are two things I don't think are going to happen. We're not going to terraform Mars. If we screw up this planet, we're toast. We got to look at this planet. It's so expensive to leave the Earth in large numbers. It would take about 1,000 years, $10 trillion to terraform Mars. Yes, you could make Mars habitable. You know how to do that. NASA engineered this 30 years ago. It's possible. I don't think we're going to do that. And then back in the 70s, there were these amazing visions of pinwheel, artificial gravity habitats in Earth orbit with 10,000 people. And you look at this from like 1975 and you think, this is commissioned by NASA. And you think, what were they smoking? Well, it was the 1970s. They were smoking, even within NASA. So this isn't going to happen either. It's going to be a modest number of people. So, my last set of predictions. We're going to find a nearby Earth. And it hopefully will be close. May not be Proxima Centauri, probably about 10 light years away. And I do think that breakthrough starshot will be therefore motivated to send remote sensing nanobots to that nearby Earth, just to see what's happening. Is it alive? Does it have people like us? That's a compelling long-term science goal. I think we're going to develop the tools for suspended animation, which is what we would need to for us rather than nanobots to lead the solar system. These technologies are being developed in the medical sector to deal with near-death experiences. Replacement of body fluids has taken place in mammal analogs of humans, like pigs and dogs, and they've been taken down to cryogenic temperatures with body fluids replaced and brought back with like 50% success rate. Okay, some dogs, some pigs die with 50% success, but it's happening. So I think suspended animation is going to be on the cards. We'll figure that one out. I think the Chinese will get to the moon next, and that'll probably kick a new space race into gear. I think by I'm going to say in 20 years we will rack from 7 now. We will count our 1,000 space tourists. I think one or both or more of the private space sector entrepreneurs will succeed in their visions because we're watching it happen right now. I think also some of these private sector companies, like Richard Branson, late in his life when he wants to make a mark, he's going to take, NASA has some incredible plans. Remember, NASA is short of money, not of talent. So among the plans NASA has on its shelf that's never been funded is the plan to send a hydrobot, a nuclear-powered lander, to the surface of Europa, melt through the ice, and release a hydrobot to look for life in one of the most likely places to find life off Earth. And I think, the engineering's all been done, the costs are there. For a fraction of $1 billion, I think some of these space entrepreneurs are going to just dust off some of these incredible ideas and just do them. And so I'll predict that Richard Branson, late in his life, will find life beyond Earth, and that will be the first place we find life off Earth, not on Mars. I'm going to predict that they'll first offer a baby, forget about sex in space, they'll first offer a baby that's as monumental as when we left Africa 50,000 years ago. The beginning and the potential of a new race. Because when humans leave Earth and form a new colony, we will diverge. The biology, the genetics of an off-Earth colony are very clear. That in a few thousand generations, the altered physical circumstance and environment will lead to speciation. We essentially will become a new species. And I think that will happen. It'll take a while. I think Mars is going to be hard, regardless of the movie and the book and so on. I think it's going to take a while to get a Mars colony. It's expensive, it's difficult, it's dangerous, but we'll do it. And then I think Google, since they want to own the world of information, they will run with this nanobot idea, and they will essentially litter the near-Earth environment, including the nearest planetary bodies, with nanobots to use neural nets to sense information, send it back to the Earth. They will control the world of information on a planetary scale. Why not? They got to have a vision beyond what they've already controlled search. That's getting a little boring for them. I think I'm going to give Project Starshot they'll do, and I'm going to put their timescale. This is their direct claim of the timescale for exploring the nearby star system with these nanobots. I'll just put them on my timeline. I'm going to say that a little beyond that, we'll develop an extension of that technology where the nanobots are able to mine moons or asteroids to make replicas of themselves, and then they can proliferate exponentially through the solar system or the galaxy. That's called the von Neumann machine idea from the visionary computer scientist at Princeton in the 1950s. So I think we'll get there too. And at that point, it won't be us exploring because we're big and clunky and we need too much care and feeding. but are extensions, the sensory extensions of ourselves, where we're reaching their tentacles exponentially through the galaxy. And I think teleportation is going to start happening. So that's the only Star Trek stuff I'm going to throw at you. Because in 1995, an unnoticed paper written by Charles Bennett at Lawrence Livermore Lab showed that there is no physics objection to teleportation. The wave function doesn't collapse. You can have coherent information at a distance, quantum action at a distance, and so the physics fundamental objection to teleportation does not exist. It's just a matter of engineering. Well, it's some crazy engineering to do that, but maybe we'll make progress and get there too. And so my final thought for you is not really leaving the solar system, but within a century, I think we will have gone well beyond this near-Earth cocoon, this 1/2 day drive straight up to zero gravity in Earth orbit, to be masters of the solar system. And to give you a sense of that vision, let me leave you with a couple of minutes, a beautiful video by Wim Wormquist, set to words written decades before by Carl Sagan of what that might look like, what that might feel like, and hope to get you anticipating it.
Material advantages, secondary life has been first energy, unproven. Imagine 400 generations in villages and cities. We haven't forgotten. The open road still softly calls. Like a new forgotten song of childhood.
bound to be questions, so I'll open it up to anybody who has things to ask a Chris.
Sure, take questions. One answer them very well. It's about the future. Yeah. she was asking about the $10 trillion estimate for terraforming Mars. NASA did about 3 different studies in the 80s and 70s, and it's got a little cheaper, but basically it's 3 stages. The most expensive phase is actually bombing Mars with sufficient energy to liberate enough carbon dioxide, subterranean carbon dioxide, to set off our little greenhouse effect. And that's the most expensive phase, because it's like nuclear weapons or a lot of energy. Then when you trigger the greenhouse effect, you raise the surface temperature by 15 degrees C, and then you start having surface water. So, there are 3 stages, and the microbial part of generating an oxygenic atmosphere is actually the slowest part, but not necessarily the most expensive part. Oh, right. So that's a good point. So the Mars has no magnetic field, so it's not well protected. So that's right. So you're never going to make it as habitable as the Earth. You're going to have to thicken the atmosphere up a lot, and you still won't be having the shield against cosmic rays. Any other questions? I mean, presumably the most important question is, when do I get to go? Richard Branson is still taking deposits. Remember, that's just a 7-minute zero gravity joyride. I'll tell you one interesting factoid. That when they had their disaster 18 months ago and the loss of their prototype and the co-pilot died and the pilot nearly died, Branson went online the next day and offered everyone who put a deposit down, which as we know is A-list of celebrities, Brangelina and Tom Hanks and all these people. He offered them all their money back, their deposits back, and I think he had 5 or 6 takers out of hundreds, even thousands. So again, the people who want to do this, even if they're celebrities, understand that it's risky. That was interesting.